Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews, and general musical meanderings. 2020 is over, and we can all pretty much look back on it and say it really wasn't the greatest year ever. And it was made none the better by the passing of Eddie Van Halen toward the end of last year. And since then, I've been doing a series of posts on the David Lee Roth era of albums. And so the next one up that I'm looking at is Fair Warning, their fourth album. Now, I can't tell you exactly when I got Fair Warning. I've had it for quite a while. I think I picked it up on like maybe a bargain bin at Best Buy or something like that. And it's like, yeah, this is the one I hear. It's the album that Van Halen fans love to talk about. So getting to this album has been sort of part of the ulterior motive I've had for this whole series, because each of these albums is always made the richer by seeing its place in the bigger picture of Van Halen's catalog. And I think particularly by the time you get to Fair Warning, some really interesting things are happening in Van Halen. So when we just left the last post, we saw that Van Halen is starting to have some internal tensions. And then, the understanding was that those were always there. But they're really starting to manifest in some pretty real ways. When we get to Fair Warning, Van Halen's music is starting to get pulled in several different directions. On the one hand, Eddie Van Halen is really trying to show the band's worth beyond just being a party band. He wants them to be remembered for being something more than that, having a use, a meaning besides just being a party band, without abandoning that at the same time. Of course, David Lee Roth, on the other end, wants to keep things being a party band. He wants it to continue to play to the masses and create pop music hits. And on the other side, and this is where the tensions really start to get interesting, is that Ted Templeman, their producer up to this point, who's done extremely amazing things with getting the band off the ground, is really still trying to keep the band recording live in the studio. He always recognized that Van Halen was a live band, and he was very opposed to Van Halen doing things in the studio that they couldn't do live. He really wanted them to be able to recreate what they do in the studio in a live setting, because he knew they could do it. But Eddie really was starting to chafe at this limitation. He really wanted to expand the palette of the band. He wanted to think a little bit more compositionally, I think, rather than just as a guitar player, although that was something that he was still very interested in. My understanding is that it was to the point that Eddie Van Halen would go through the day at the studio and they would do the recordings. And then after everybody went home, he would ask Don Landy, their engineer, to help sneak him into the studio so he could re-record and re-overdub parts that he was working on, he was thinking about, that he wasn't satisfied from the recording session from that day. And as Eddie tells it, very often the members of the band didn't even notice. He felt that they were very disassociated with what was going on musically with the band and more interested in what the band's image was like. And that caused a little bit more disillusion with him, I believe. And I do know that inspired him to go on and create his own studio, which eventually became 5150, the renowned 5150 studio. But all this tension in the group manifested itself in a new direction for the band's sound. And that allows Fair Warning to kind of be a pivot point in David Lee Roth's tenure with Van Halen. At some points, Fair Warning looks back on Van Halen's catalog and pulls from the best thing they've done in the past, but also comes at Van Halen's sound from a darker and more menacing and generally heavier sound than they had up to that point. Definitely trying to make a conscious move away from the kind of pop band party stats that they've had in the past, with some exceptions. I mean, there's definitely a couple cash grabs on this album. So This Is Love, for example, is a song that was clearly made for the radio. And I Don't Want to Hear About Later is another one that's kind of, it uses all the old Van Halen tricks up to that have been successful on the first 2 or 3 albums. I Don't Want to Hear About Later really could have been on Van Halen 2, and it wouldn't have been too terribly out of place. But by and large, the album is almost arguably a concept album about being kind of down in the dumps. And that's partially also instigated by David Lee Roth's broadening scope. He really kind of almost has something to say. And that's odd for David Lee Roth. And partially that was inspired by him going to Haiti on a trip and actually seeing like corruption and poverty in a way that he, kind of as a sheltered Midwestern American, never really saw or experienced. So when he came back, he kind of had a little bit more of a dark take on his lyrics overall.
At night I walk this stinking street past the crazies on my block, and I see the same old faces and I hear that same old talk, and I'm searching for the latest thing I break in this routine. I'm talking some new kicks, ones like you ain't never seen. This is home. This is Main Street.
And if you look at this Fair Warning as a pivot point, I think that you can see some things where, of course, he's looking back and kind of doing things that have worked before. But also, he's starting to develop ideas about what would happen in the future. And there's several points, I think, on Fair Warning that predict what's going to happen on 1984. Now, I want to make sure you understand, I don't view this as a diss. I'm not trying to say that Eddie Van Halen is copying himself or being redundant, although sometimes it can kind of seem that way. Instead, I wanted to think about the idea that even though Eddie Van Halen is a very spontaneous guitar player, especially if you talk about his work as a soloist, he also was a fan of refining his ideas. He would come up with an idea and then come back to it, and then come back to it. And there's a point at which, in the early part of their catalog, that stopped working for them. You know, if you look at Women and Children First, he started going back to early demos, and when they're trying to rework that stuff, it didn't fit the band anymore. So there's some spots in here where that happened, but here I think that really Eddie Van Halen was starting to hit a really creative peak. And he starts shopping some ideas that I think would actually come to fruition on the album 1984. Rumor has it that he was shopping the keyboard lick for Jump as early as this album and was just getting turned down by the band because it was just too far out from what the band was about at the time. His interest in keyboard playing had been around for a while, but I think he had a growing interest specifically in synthesis that you start to see on this album. The tune Second from the End, Sunday Afternoon in the Park. It's just kind of an instrumental groove, and there's been instrumental things that have happened on all Van Halen albums up to this point. But it's not even a guitar instrumental. This particular one is more like a bass groove thing, but that features heavily enveloped analog synthesizer sounds. And that was something that would definitely come into fruition later on in 1984 whenever you have the opening track of that album. There's also a couple of other points at which Fair Warning kind of predicts 1984. I think also that the tune Dirty Movies is kind of like the prequel to I'll Wait, which is a big one later on. Kind of David Lee Roth's slightly unhealthy obsession with porn and porn actresses as a theme the thematic thread that runs through both of these songs. But also in a more musical sense, a more tangible sense, at the very end of the tune, I Don't Want to Hear About It Later, the closing lick from that tune is the exact same lick, pretty much, that opens up the track from Girl Gone Bad, also from 1984. In addition to all these little ideas and these little threads that kind of bind Van Halen's past and their future together on this album, I think that Fair Warning also happens to have the sort of pinnacle masterpiece that Van Halen had created up to that point, and that's the song Unchained. I'm always floored by how that song gets so much done in a 3.5-minute period. The structure of the song is brilliant. It was originally written on a keyboard, which makes all these kind of like suspensions and thirds that you hear in the riffs in there kind of make some sense. It also has some really disorienting rhythms in it, where in the kind of pre-chorus section of the tune, there's this opening bit that's almost like a 13 beat, like they drop 2 or 3 beats at the end to kind of give it this disorienting feel to it. And here's another place where Michael Anthony's backup vocals absolutely make the song. You know, he has a certain purity to his sound, and he nails the intonation on everything. This is back before you could pitch shift things in Pro Tools or whatever else. Michael Anthony went in and sang those notes and nailed them every single time with the purest tone I think that you could come up with. And he's singing these great high thirds up there, and a third is a tricky note to sing. It doesn't always tune the way that you think it was. So not only does he have the ability to sing up there physically, but his intonation concept allowed those notes to really shine out. And it's kind of the part of this, the chorus of this song that's almost most memorable is that specific third on top. Although there's plenty of places on Fair Warning, where you could point out the limitations of David Lee Roth as a singer. As an entertainer, you really can't mess with him. And there's so many opportunities that they give David Lee Roth to just kind of do his own thing here. One of the things that David Lee Roth was really amazing at was his ability to just kind of ramble on seemingly about nothing, but still somehow make it work. A talent that's beyond singing, just getting to be up there and work a crowd. And I think that Unchained has one of the best examples of that ever, when he kind of breaks the fourth wall and talks to Ted Templeman in the control room.
Woo-hoo! Take a look at this! Hey man, that suit is you! Woo-wee! You'll get some leg tonight for sure! Tell us how you do! Woo-hoo-hoo!
Come on, Dave, give me a break.
Hey, one break coming up! Change! Ain't nothing stays the same! Unchained! Yeah, you hit the ground running, changed!
So although Unchained is oddly placed, I think, at the beginning of side 2 of this album, I really think that it's one of the best things that Van Halen did with David Lee Roth, but 1984 notwithstanding. And by itself, of course, is kind of, I think, worth the price of admission. But I also think that Fair Warning is a hidden gem in the Van Halen catalog, and its status as a sort of a cult fan favorite is super well deserved. There are parts in here where it doesn't seem consistent, but really it's because you have these 2 or 3 songs that are really looking back at Van Halen's past more than looking forward to the future. And those kind of poppier songs, those safe songs that they wrote on the album, give it the feeling of it being a little bit inconsistent. But overall, the feel of the album, the tone of the album is the heaviest thing they'd ever done up to that point, and definitely has a sense of conviction that they hadn't had probably since their first album. So I really think this is a great one, worth checking out. So thanks again for tuning in on these. I have a couple more albums from the Van Halen series to go. I've also got more music coming out in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to know when that's going to happen, please like and subscribe, and perhaps share this video out with your friends. Check me out on Spotify. Of course, I'll put Unchained over on Spotify because I love that song so much. And I look forward to see you guys soon. Until then, catch you on the flip side.